Hi, this is Brad Linder with Liliputing, and this is the Asus 1015E, which is a 10-inch mini notebook with an Intel Celeron processor, a 1366 by 768 pixel display, 2 gigs of RAM, and a 320 gigabyte hard drive. Looks a lot like a netbook, but it's not being positioned as a netbook because it's more powerful, but it's about the same size and shape as a lot of older netbooks, and it has a similar price, selling for under $300, which makes it one of the most affordable ultra-portable laptop computers around. Let's take a quick look at some of the features here. We've got a VGA port, USB 3.0, HDMI, a vent, which is pretty important because the Celeron processor does generate a fair amount of heat, so the fan is almost always pumping warm air out of there. Can get a little noisy at times. 2 USB 2.0 ports, and so that's a total of 3 USB ports. Ethernet, and you can see that you sort of have to open it up this way to actually dock your Ethernet jack. SD card slot, and a combination mic and headset jack. On the bottom, we've got a removable battery. This is a 56 watt-hour battery, which lasts for about 4.5 to 6 hours in my test, depending on what you're using it for. And we've got stereo speakers here, 802.11n Wi-Fi, no Bluetooth. Let's go ahead and open it up. You can see we've got a glossy lid here, a matte bottom, and a matte display. So it was asleep right now. You can see that it's running Windows 8. And I've got it set to pretty much just go to the desktop, but you can use Windows 8 style applications in the start menu and so forth here. Now I find with this particular model it makes sense to sort of treat it like a typical laptop. It doesn't have touch. I don't think it's really optimized for touch-based applications. So what I wound up doing is just sort of pinning the apps that I use the most, like the Irfan View application here and Google Chrome. And so when I go straight to the desktop, I can just go ahead and load the applications that I want to load. The keyboard is a little bit smaller than your typical keyboard. It's maybe around 90% full-size keys. It doesn't take that long to get used to. After a couple of minutes, I find myself typing on this just as quickly as I would on a full-size keyboard. But if you have big hands, you might find it a little bit cramped. There's some keys that sort of have to serve double duty. That's not something you only see on 10-inch models, but it's definitely something you do see on smaller notebooks. So page up, page down, home and end, for instance, are on the same buttons as the arrow keys. You just hold down the function key and you can get those. And then of course you've got your dedicated function keys up top for things like volume and screen brightness and whatnot. The touchpad area is a little bit on the small side here, but it works reasonably well, and it supports Windows 8 style gestures. So you can swipe from the edge, for instance, to bring up the Windows 8 charms. You can go to search that way and so forth. And it also supports, let's go back to the desktop, things like 2-finger for tap to click and 2-finger scrolling. So overall the touchpad works. It's a little small. I find that I'm a little bit more comfortable if I plug in a mouse and, or a USB or a wireless mouse. I can get a little bit more work done that way, but in a pinch this will do. So you can see that we've got the Chrome web browser open here. Let's go ahead and open up some web pages, and you can get a basic idea of performance on everyday tasks like web browsing. Loaded that pretty quickly. And you'll also notice that it's a 1366 by 768 pixel display, whereas a lot of older netbooks with 10-inch screens had 1024 by 600 pixel screens. And what that means is that you basically fit more text on the screen here than you might otherwise. So things look pretty good, and it's a matte display, which means that while you're seeing glare here on the bezel, there's not really a lot of glare on the screen itself. Viewing angles are okay. Not stellar, but they're okay. So let's see if we can find something more colorful picture here. And what happens is, from side to side, the colors still look pretty good. But if you tilt it back, you can see that it starts to look almost black. So that might be one of the reasons why this one doesn't open to a very wide angle, because the farther back you push it, the more the colors start to look a little bit washed out. In terms of overall performance, this guy has an Intel Celeron 847 dual-core 1.1 GHz processor. It's a Sandy Bridge chip, and I found that I have no problem doing things like streaming HD video from YouTube and Hulu and Netflix not signed into YouTube right now, so let's just go ahead and go to my channel and watch a video in full screen. Switch to 720p. That's already in 720p. And so there you go. I mean, that looks pretty good. It has stereo speakers, so if I turn the audio on, you could hear me talking twice at this point. And so in general terms, I'm pretty impressed with the performance. It's much faster than any 10-inch tablets or mini notebooks or netbooks or whatever you want to call them that I've seen featuring Intel Atom processors, whether we're talking about Pine Trail, Clover Trail, Cedar Trail. This guy has roughly twice the performance, I'd say, of what you would have expected from a Cedar Trail device, and it's faster than anything with a Clover Trail chip as well. And that makes sense because it's got an Intel Celeron processor instead. It's a 17-watt processor, so it does drain a little bit more battery, but again, I can get up to 5 or 6 hours of battery life here if I try. Now, one thing I don't recommend doing is you can underclock the battery, or the processor, in order to get better battery life. There's something called the Power for Gear hybrid engine here. It's going to take a second to load, and you can switch from performance mode to battery saving. That's a custom setting that Asus includes here, and it sort of underclocks the processor and changes some other settings to help extend your battery life. When you do that, you wind up dramatically slowing this down, and I find it is much less responsive, and it does feel a little bit more like an older netbook. So I wouldn't really do that unless you're running very simple tasks and can get away with it. So I think the beauty of this particular machine is that it combines sort of price, performance, and portability. So it's about 2.8 pounds, it's easy to carry around. Even the power adapter is one piece, so it's pretty portable. And for under $300, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find something that's this small and offers as much the kind of capabilities it does. I've had no problems using it to surf the web with a dozen browser tabs open. I've had no problems doing some basic document editing. I wrote most of the text version of the review for this laptop using this, and I've done a fair amount of blogging on it. So as far as 10-inch devices go, it's probably one of the best ones on the market for getting sort of typical Windows-style tasks done. It doesn't have a touchscreen, so if you really wanted something that's more like a tablet, this isn't going to be perfect. It's not necessarily the thinnest device around. It measures about 1.4 inches in the back, so if you really care about that sort of thing, you might be better off with an Ultrabook. But most Ultrabooks are going to cost you significantly more money than something like the Asus 1015E. So there you go. That's a quick overview of this laptop. It handles HD video playback, basic web browsing, some games. I wouldn't necessarily use it as a high-end gaming device. It has Intel HD 2000 graphics, which will do some 3D accelerated graphics and definitely some high-definition video playback, but it's not exactly a beast in terms of gaming. But for $250 to $300, it's pretty hard to beat at this point. So there you go. That's the Asus 1015E. This is Brad Linder with Liliputing. You can find more details at liliputing.com.